And welcome everybody, Brother Dan Goodwin here. You're watching Prophecy in the Spotlight. We got a show for you today about the times of the Gentiles. Let me read a scripture for you out of Luke chapter 21 and verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Have you ever wondered what is this thing called the times of the Gentiles? When did it begin? When does it end? We're going to answer all those questions for you in today's show. Don't go away. And welcome, Prophecy in the Spotlight. I'm your host, Brother Dan Goodwin, of course, and sitting with me is my co-host, Dr. Charles Hiltebittle. Doc, good to see you today.
Yes, amen.
And these are exciting days.
Very exciting.
Here we are, as I say so often, here we are at the end of all things.
At the end of it. Yes.
And speaking of the end of all things, the times of the Gentiles has something to do with all this.
Yes, much.
And you
much
wrote
more.
an article, and you sent this to me, and I loved it. This is great. And I said, man, we're going to do a show just on this. I don't think I've ever heard a prophecy show on the times of the Gentiles. Have you? Have you ever heard a show on it?
Not that I can think
I've
of.
heard it referenced. I've heard it mentioned, but I've never heard it explained, really. And I gleaned a few things from you that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. I had a pretty good handle on it, but
sure.
you put more light on it and helped me understand this thing a little better. Especially when we get down to Daniel 2 in just a few minutes here. We'll have you talk about that. But let's start with Matthew chapter 24 here. Do you want me to read this and
yes,
then
go
you
ahead.
comment on it?
Go ahead.
Beginning in verse 1, of course, Matthew, so misunderstood by people.
Yes, it is.
And I think one reason is they don't understand the times of the Gentiles.
They don't know what age is being talked about.
Yeah, so let me read verses 1 through 3 of Matthew 24. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. That always strikes me funny. Are they acting like he's never seen him before or something? I mean,
And they're going to impress God.
yeah, they're going to impress him with some buildings. And,
yes.
And then verse 2, and then Jesus kind of lets the air out of the sails. Jesus said to them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And then verse 3, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So tell us a little bit about this.
Well, the setting is they've come from the upper room, and they're making their way through by passing by the temple, commenting about the stones. One of the words in there that is kind of unique is he said thrown down, indicating that that's what would really happen, and we know historically they were thrown down. And so they pass on by, and they're thinking, because it's about a 20-minute walk, you go on past the temple, then you come out the eastern gate across the Kidron Valley over to the Mount of Olives. So they're thinking, when is this, what is he talking about? So the first thing, when he sits down, gets ready to teach them, the first thing they said, hey, when's this going to happen? And they want to know. They actually asked two questions. The second was a two-part question. And they want to know, when's this going to happen? When's this destruction you're talking about of the temple? And then secondly, we want to know, when's the signs of your coming? And in order to do that, it has to be tied with the end of the world. Now, the word world there is not talking about the cosmos. It's talking about the eon, or a era of time. So when is this age going to end? And it's tied with his second coming.
What do you think? And my gears are rolling here as you're talking. Stuff's coming to me that we didn't plan to talk about, so I hope I don't put you on the spot here. But I'm just trying to put myself in the Lord's place here, and in the apostles' place. He's just told them. They say, "Hey, we're going to show you the buildings."
Yeah.
And he just pulls the air out of their sail and says, you see all this? It's all going to come crumbling down. Not one stone will be left upon another. What do you think that they thought of that?
Oh, they were befuddled. Well, what? That's why as soon as they sat down, the first question, when is this going to happen? Because they've been thinking for 15 or 20 minutes on that statement.
Yeah.
And so their first question, when's this going to happen? And but then they want to know, because the whole context is they're thinking, they know he's the Messiah. They know that he's going to be crucified, but they still haven't grasped it and comprehended that at that point.
And they know there's a kingdom coming.
They know there's a kingdom coming. And so their mindset is this: when are you going to establish your kingdom? That's the first thing they ask after he's resurrected. Are you going to establish your kingdom now?
So at this point in time, if I'm the apostles, I'm thinking, okay, this beautiful temple that we have here, Herod's temple, is going to be destroyed. What I'd be asking, now they didn't ask it, but I'd be asking, Lord, are we going to build another one in the future? Or are you going to build one? Those are questions that I would have had.
Right.
Because their temple is going to be destroyed. Yeah. And they know that there's got to be a temple in the future.
Sure.
So, I mean, I got more questions than I've got answers here.
Well, they want to know, because really what they're thinking is, when is the millennial? When is that kingdom that you're going to reign on? When's that coming?
Now, at the beginning of the show, I read Luke 21, I think I did anyway, verse 24. Talks about until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Yes. Well, let me read Romans chapter 11, verse 25, because it's similar, and it has the same phrase, the times of the Gentiles. Yes. Well, this one says the fullness of the Gentiles. Let me read that. Romans chapter 11, verse 25, which, by the way, that chapter is very important in understanding the position of Israel during the church age and what's happened to them, the blindness and all that. Here's what it says: I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness, in part, is happened to Israel. For how long? Until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So there it is again. Yes. This fullness of the Gentile. It seems like these phrases, fullness of the Gentiles, the times of the Gentile, it seems like the Lord is telling us there's a change happens. Something different in relation to Israel. Tell us about this change.
Well, I think, of course, they're looking for the millennial reign that's coming. And they want to know when that's going to happen. They know that that's a direct change from the rule that they're under now. One of the things the Jews were wanting, they not only needed what they would have called a Messiah for redemption, they were really more interested in a Messiah to deliver them from the bondage of the Gentile rule at that time, Rome. And so they know that somewhere in the future there's going to be an Israel rule. And they want to know, when is that going to happen? And they tie that to the end of the current age.
In other words, for 600 years, they've not been a sovereign nation.
Right.
I think a lot of people misunderstand this, because when Jesus comes on the scene, the temple's there, the Jews are there, but people don't realize it's still not the same. They're under the rulership.
They're still under Gentile rule.
Yeah.
Even it required the Gentile magistrate, Pilate, to be the one to condemn Christ to the cross, because they didn't have the power to do that, because they were not a sovereign in that sense, total control.
So since 605 BC, when Babylon came in, that's when they lost their temple, they lost their homeland, basically. For 70 years, they're outside of their homeland, and then they're given permission during the Medes and the Persians. Under Cyrus, he's going to give them permission to rebuild.
That's when the times of the Gentiles began.
Okay. So let's go back to that. When did this era begin, this thing we call the times of the Gentiles? Make it easy for the audience to grasp this.
Well, it all is in relationship to Israel and how the Gentile kingdoms have related with Israel. So it began with Nebuchadnezzar. That's why you're introduced in about the second year of the captivity, we find chapter number 2.
Yeah.
And God is going to give a dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And later in chapter 7, he's going to give a vision to Daniel to clear all of that up. But in that dream that Nebuchadnezzar gets, and then Daniel is going to interpret, is a picture of what is the beginning of the times of the Gentiles, all the way to the end of the Gentile age and the millennial reign that's coming. That's all in that image picture. And so the reason why it begins there is because Nebuchadnezzar is the first Gentile kingdom that is trampling Jerusalem under his feet. He destroys the temple, and that begins Gentile rule over Jerusalem, even yet to this day. Even though Israel is back in her land and all that she is, I'm here to tell you, she can only do so much without the Gentile world okaying it.
Right, and in a sense, that's still true today.
It's still true today.
Even though Israel exists, they're surrounded by enemies, and they lean heavily on the United States.
They lean heavily
for their help here.
Yes. So the times of the Gentiles began with Nebuchadnezzar. He's that image of the head of gold, and then the Medo-Persians, the silver, and then the bronze, which is Alexander the Great, the Grecians, and then the two legs of which is the division of the east and western part of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But the culmination of it, of course, is those 10 toes.
And that takes place during the tribulation.
That's during the tribulation period. And then the picture is that a stone cut without hands comes down and destroys those toes and establishes a kingdom that's not given to another. That's the millennial reign of Christ. So the times of the Gentiles are in relationship to Gentiles trotting over Israel. And it will not come to an end until the Battle of Armageddon.
Right. Okay. So that's... Now, in the meantime, there's kind of almost two kingdoms at play here. You got the times of the Gentiles, but then the church age is stuck in. Explain that a little bit.
Well, the church age, of course, after the Jews have rejected their Messiah, you can go to chapter 12 of the book of Matthew, and you see the rejection, and then the information that follows that in the parables of Matthew 13. And the church age is a parenthesis between the 483 years, the first 69 weeks of Daniel chapter 9, and the final week, the 70th week, which is the tribulation period. The church is stuck in between that. And so the church age has come into existence long after the Gentile age has already been in existence. Mm-hmm. What the question that they're asking in Matthew is not when is the end of the church age, but when is the end of the Gentile age, because they were looking for the millennial reign.
Yeah, and the kingdom.
And so if a person, if you understand that the question there of the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world or this age, it's not talking about the church age, it's talking about the Gentile age. That'll help people understand why they don't find some of the things about the church in Matthew chapter 24.
Right.
Because the age it's being dealt with is the Gentile age, not the church age.
Yeah. And of course, there's difference of opinions on the actual birth of the church.
Sure.
Most people say Pentecost. I don't. Something definitely influenced and mattered about the church on Pentecost.
Absolutely.
I personally believe that it began before that. But
I personally agree. I believe it began when he called out the first disciples out of the followers of the baptism of John the Baptist.
Matthew 18, he tells them, if you got a problem, take it to the church.
Yes.
If the church didn't start till Pentecost, what's he talking about?
And on the day of Pentecost, there was 120 names on the church roll.
Yeah, they were already, they added, in Acts, they added to the church. Yeah. So there's lots of arguments for the church being already here.
Right. And we do have an age of the church, I believe.
Now, Brother Waugh, a good friend of mine, has an interesting scenario that I put in some of my books. It's kind of like the birth of a baby. What happens first? The head appears first, and then the body later. The body appears, maybe Pentecost, but the head appeared in the Gospels.
Sure.
During the Old Testament age, when the veil is still intact and they're still offering sacrifices in the temple. So they kind of ran together for a little bit. The head appeared.
And it'll be another 40 years before the temple itself is actually destroyed.
Yeah.
and the fulfillment of that prophecy of those stones being thrown down.
Yeah.
I think that might even be prophetic.
Now, I want to read a little bit in your article here for the audience. When Nebuchadnezzar took Israel into captivity and destroyed the temple, this is when Gentile rule began, trotting Jerusalem under their feet. And to this day, nothing major. See, we haven't talked about this too much yet. I think you shed a little bit of light on this, but I want to read how you said it here because this is interesting. You said, to this day, nothing major in Israel happens without a Gentile leader or leaders negotiating or causing something to happen.
That's right.
That's quite
It's
a thought
true.
there.
Right down to these Abrahamic Accords that just took place.
Yeah.
Israel didn't do that.
Which, by the way,
Gentile leaders did all of that.
this really isn't even a peace treaty anyway.
It's not
If
peace.
you look at what all it is they're acknowledging that Israel is a state,
Yeah.
and they're making an agreement to have trade with them, which is a good deal for them.
And neither of these nations have a border with Israel.
No.
A peace treaty would be something that if you had a dispute or if you were in war and you settled it with peace, they'd not been at war. This is simply an acknowledgement for a trade. And after all, these are two of the smaller of the Arab kingdoms to begin with. And I'm not saying it's not an important thing.
I think they're going to be a domino effect, aren't they?
I think it'll be a domino effect.
I think the other Arab nations will look, they're starting to prosper. They're trading with Israel and America. And
I think it's a little off this subject, but I think it's setting up for the Ezekiel 38 war more than it is for what we call real peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this other paragraph I want to read, because I wrote a big wow here and I highlighted it. But we've already mentioned this, but I want to read how you wrote it here. When will it end? Speaking of the times of the Gentiles,
right.
And you said this at Armageddon. This is all, and you mentioned this is all seen in the image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2.
Right.
The end of the age is seen in the feet with the 10 toes, partly iron and partly clay, when they're destroyed at the second coming of Christ with the stone cut out without hands. Now here I want to ask you something that's not in our notes here. So I'm putting you on the spot again.
Okay.
Because I had this thought while we were discussing this. Why do you think Nebuchadnezzar was given a dream that he couldn't interpret? He didn't even remember the dream, let alone the interpretation of the dream. You got any thoughts on that?
Well, because he's a pagan Gentile.
Exactly.
And God's going to communicate to the born again, to the believer.
Yes, sir. That's exactly what
it's going to require, a lot of people think, lost people say, well, I prayed and God's answered prayer. He didn't answer your prayer. He answered some believer's prayer that was praying the same thing.
This wasn't even about Nebuchadnezzar.
No, it wasn't.
This was a message to Daniel.
This is a message to Daniel's people. That's why the book of Daniel is so important because in chapter 9, God's going to give to Daniel the 490-year prophecy that not only ends that 70 years, but sets the stage for what we now would see by over 2,500 years.
Now, we got a little chart here that you have. I'm going to try to get it on the screen. We'll see if Rex can get it up for us. But as he puts that up, if he gets it up, I want you to notice the green arrow, because that's the times of the Gentiles. It goes from 606 BC all the way to Armageddon. So notice that arrow there if we get that up on the screen for you. And you'll see the church age up above, and you'll see the Old Testament from Babylon and Persia and Greece. But notice the green arrow. Those other events are happening during the times of the Gentiles, which is going to last, from 605 BC all the way to the end of the 2000th year and the beginning of the Kingdom Age.
Just to the end of this age, yes.
So hopefully he got that up for you, and you may be able to see that chart a little bit. Doc, is this article going to be in your newsletter?
It'll be in the next Issachar report.
Tell them how they can get on the mailing list for the Issachar report.
They can contact us, walkthroughtimeministries.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all
WTTministries.com.
Okay, and we'll put that up, and all they do is email you or
email
contact
us
you.
there, contact us through there, and they can get on our email
it's
list.
An email list, but you also have
we have a hard copy as well if they want to help.
Okay, so, and we're going to be...
Every 2 months I send out this car report.
And you and I are going to be discussing, and we're probably going to do something in the near future for the ministry here.
For Spotlight, yes.
Maybe you and I will write articles.
Yes.
And put more workload upon ourselves.
Yes.
And articles are a lot of work.
People have no idea.
Yeah, a lot of work. I used to write an article every month for Prophecy News. It was work.
Yeah.
And prophecy was, here's something for the audience. Prophecy was not always for the immediate time. Mm-hmm. Often prophecies would have dual fulfillment.
Sure.
With the first as a foreshadowing of the ultimate purpose. Can you give us an example of that?
Well, there were a lot of prophecies that were given that was certainly beyond their time. They had no idea about it. And then there are other prophecies that I believe have dual fulfillment. One would be Daniel chapter 8, where he talks about the ceasing of the sacrifice and the things in the temple.
Now that's Alexander the Great. That's the Grecian Empire, right?
That happened.
Daniel 8.
That happened in those time period between the Old and New Testament, that 400 years.
I've had people argue with me, say, that's not talking about the Antichrist. That's Alexander the Great. Now explain why they're wrong here.
Well,
they're right and wrong.
Because Jesus, in his earthly ministry, which is going to be much later than the general that does offer that pig on the altar, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals. That was a foreshadowing, because Jesus later says that of the Antichrist, even in Matthew chapter 24, of the desolation that's coming in the future. Yeah. And so that was a shadow and a picture of a type of the Antichrist and what he's going to do. But the final fulfillment of it will be at the middle of the tribulation period by the Antichrist himself. Yeah.
So both people are right. It is about Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
But within the story in Daniel 8 about Alexander the Great is a further story prophesying the Antichrist of the end times.
In the end times, yes.
And there's no way you can read through chapter 8, especially the second part, and
not know
see
it's the
that.
Antichrist.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's definitely not talking about Alexander the Great as you go on through the story.
Right.
So I'm glad that you pointed out the dual prophecy thing, because again, so many people misunderstand the Bible because they'll jump on one interpretation, and you've said the same thing I do. There's always three ways to look at Scripture. Mm-hmm. The literal, and then figurative. Look for figurative things that apply, but then look for the prophecy, the prophetic look to the Scripture.
Many times you'll find all three in the verse,
and they're all three right there in Daniel 8.
Yes.
With that story, it's a literal story. There are figurative lessons there to glean. Mm-hmm. There's also a prophetic lesson that's going to come to pass here real soon. You talk here a little bit about prophecy often given during a time of abundance and prosperity.
Yes. Think about Joseph. Joseph's going to interpret the dream of Pharaoh. And so they're going to give this prophecy, and my goodness, what do we need to do all this? Look at all the abundance we've got. But prophecy sometimes it's going to happen, whether you understand it at the present. You can't just look at the setting of the time. You got to follow the roadmap that God gives.
Okay, now talk about we got Hosea chapter 6.
Oh yes,
the 2 days and.
He said after 2 days. And I'm going to raise you up, and then on the third day, I'm going to reign with you.
Now, there's no question that's got to have a deeper meaning.
Oh my goodness. We know a day with the Lord. Peter says a day with the Lord is 1,000 years. In the book of Psalms, he talks about 1,000 years in a day. I think that's a picture of the 2,000 years of what we call the diaspora of the Jews. And here in the last bit of the second day, he's raised them back up again. And in the third day, that's a millennial reign, they're going to reign. So that's the end of this.
So what's the beginning of those 2 days of Hosea? We know the third day is the millennium. So when did that begin, in your opinion?
Well, I think it began, you go over to the book of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah said that when the shepherd is smitten, the sheep will be scattered. Jesus even uses that. He brings it up just in the last week of his ministry and said the shepherd is smitten and
you've
the
got
sheep
Zechariah here. I think you might have meant Zechariah.
Zechariah,
Yeah.
yes, Zechariah. He says that it will be. And so when did that happen? Well, that happened when they put Christ on the cross. They smote him.
All right.
And 40 years later, that temple is destroyed. And the people have been scattered throughout the world. And then here at the last end of the second day, they've been gathered back together again, just like prophecy said they would be, starting from the directions just as it was given from the north and the east. All of this just happening just like the Bible said. So at the end of the second day, Israel now is back gathered again. They're in a nation again. They're ready to be able to pick up the role of finishing that last 7 years of that prophecy.
Yeah. All right. And you have here the Israel of today must be revived, and all they need is they need purification that the tribulation days will produce.
That's what the tribulation will do.
And a remnant will accept their Messiah after the destruction of the final Gentile rule.
That's it.
That means this era of time, Gentile rule, is almost over, and this present church age will end at the last 7 years before that moment.
Yes.
And
when the church age ends, it'll be ready to pick up that last 7 years and finish out the end of the Gentile rule, set the stage for the millennial reign.
Well, this has been an interesting topic, interesting discussion. And I hope folks go to his website and ask about the newsletter and sign up, because this article will be in one of the newsletters coming up real soon with the Walk Through Time Ministries. Is that the name of the newsletter?
The newsletter is called the Issachar Report.
Issachar Report.
That's our YouTube channel.
Okay. We got a minute left, Doc. Tell them a little bit about the ministry here and how they can invest in this thing.
Well, we're reaching out, have the possibility of touching 85% of the world. That's an amazing thought, that 85% of the world could have access to a program like this. And it's an amazing investment opportunity, I believe, for an individual to be able to lay up rewards in heaven by helping finance. It requires an extreme amount of money for us to have weekly time on the television, and we'd like for folks to partner with us. Wonderful investment, an opportunity literally to be able to have a part of helping spread biblical truth to an entire world.
Okay, and they can get a hold of us, me, at daniel@godsfoundjubilee.com. That's the email, daniel@godsfoundjubilee.com. Or you can dial the 800, I don't have an 800 number yet, but you can dial 814-599-6280 if you'd like to talk to me personally. You can text that number, get a hold of me, or you can call. Well, until next time, keep your eyes on the sky.